Texas is adding thousands of new residents literally every single day. So why did 76,000 kids just mysteriously vanish from its public school system?
Yeah, I mean, it is the single biggest paradox in the state right now. You have these highways that are just jammed with new out-of-state license plates, right? Housing developments are, sprouting up overnight, but inside the public schools, the classrooms are emptying out.
It's wild. Today, we are bringing you a deep dive into the May 2026 Texas Public School Enrollment Trends Report. This was published by the nonpartisan group Texas2036. And our mission for you today is to basically extract the most critical insights from this, frankly, incredibly dense mountain of data.
Yeah, it's a very thick report.
It really is.
Yeah.
But we want to understand the mechanics of this massive, almost silent shift happening right under our noses. Because, while everyone is hyper-focused on the booming overall population, the Texas public school system just experienced its second largest enrollment drop in 40 years.
Right, and that detail, the historical context, is what makes this report so urgent. I mean, we are talking about the 2025-26 school year here.
Yeah.
Schools are fully open. There are no pandemic-era remote learning orders in place. The state economy is super active. And yet public schools lost over 76,000 students.
Wow.
That is a 1.4% decline in a single year.
Okay, let's unpack this, because 76,000 missing kids is staggering. That's essentially an entire mid-sized city's worth of students just gone from the system.
Exactly.
And the only other time we saw a drop like this was during the absolute height of COVID-19. So to see it happen now under these normal conditions means we've crossed a major psychological threshold, right? We're dropping back below 5.5 million students statewide.
Yeah, it's a huge milestone.
So how do we even begin to wrap our heads around a system that, relies on constant growth suddenly shrinking?
Well, you have to look at it as a structural failure rather than a cyclical blip.
Okay, a cyclical blip meaning what exactly?
A cyclical blip is a sudden external shock, like the pandemic, right? Where we expect numbers to eventually bounce back. But dropping below 5.5 million in a year of apparent stability, that tells us the underlying mechanics of who lives in Texas and how they choose to educate their kids have fundamentally changed.
Right.
And honestly, it sends shockwaves through literally every district budget and planning committee in the entire state.
I bet. I want to look at the map from the report for a second, because I initially assumed this was, I don't know, localized.
Is there like an oil town or something?
Exactly. Maybe an oil town lost a major employer and everyone just moved away. But it's not that at all. 18 out of the 20 Education Service Center regions, the ESC regions that divide up the state, saw declines. It is everywhere.
Yes, the geographic footprint of this decline is massive. And the biggest raw numerical losses are hitting the state's largest, most recognizable urban centers.
Right. So Region 4, which is the Houston area, lost around 24,500 students in a single year.
Huge number.
Then Region 10, the Richardson and Dallas area, lost nearly 13,000. And down south, Region 1 in the Rio Grande Valley lost over 11,400 students.
Yeah, and if you look at just those three regions alone, they account for more than half of the statewide decrease.
Which is crazy. Oh, wait, I almost forgot the bizarre anomaly in the data. Region 14 out in Abilene.
Oh, right, the Abilene anomaly.
Yeah, it was literally the only region to grow. They added roughly 2,800 students, which is a 3.9% jump. But everywhere else, just a sea of red.
Yeah, it's pretty stark.
But I have to push back here, or at least, play devil's advocate. We hear all the time that Texas is booming. People are relocating to Houston and Dallas constantly.
Sure.
How can schools in those specific cities be shrinking if the population there is growing? It doesn't make logical sense. It's like a popular restaurant that's packed every single night. There is a line out the door, but the kids' menu sales are mysteriously plummeting.
Honestly, that restaurant analogy is actually the perfect way to understand this.
Ah.
Yeah, because the restaurant is still full, but the clientele has fundamentally changed. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at the divide between major urban districts and rural districts.
Okay, break that down for me.
So over the last decade, major urban districts, those big 11 districts like Dallas ISD and Houston ISD, have lost 17.3% of their students.
Wow, 17%.
Yeah. Meanwhile, rural districts actually grew by 13.4%.
Okay, so who is moving into the cities if it isn't families with kids?
Adults. I mean, the population growth in major Texas cities is largely being driven by young professionals moving for jobs, retirees, or older families whose kids have already aged out of the K-12 system.
Got it.
And, the cost of housing in these urban cores has completely skyrocketed, which pushes younger families further out into the suburbs or entirely out to rural areas where they can actually afford a mortgage.
Ah, okay. So the total population in the county goes up, but the school-age population doesn't.
Exactly. And the report highlights a truly staggering geographic statistic to prove this.
Let's hear it.
43% of traditional independent school districts, or ISDs, are located in a county where the general population is growing, but the school district's enrollment is not.
Wow. So almost half the state is living in that exact paradox we just described.
Pretty much, yeah.
But wait, if families are just moving from Houston to the rural outskirts, the kids would still be in the Texas public school system, right? Just in a different district.
That's right.
So that rural shift doesn't explain how 76,000 kids vanish from the state total. And when I look at the demographic data in this report, I'm genuinely struggling to make the math work.
What do you mean?
Well, the report breaks this down by race and ethnicity, and 81% of the total enrollment decline came from Hispanic students. That is a drop of nearly 61,800 Hispanic students in one single year.
Yes, a massive shift.
Right, but if the Hispanic population in Texas is generally growing, how are they the exact same group disappearing from the schools? Well, by the way, white and black student populations also declined, but Asian student enrollment actually continued to grow by about 2.9%.
Right, so they aren't vanishing into thin air, obviously, but they are leaving the traditional public school system at an accelerated rate.
Okay, why?
To understand why, we have to look at how that demographic overlaps with economic factors. This heavily overlaps with another critical category, which is emergent bilingual students.
Which makes sense. I mean, if you see a massive drop in Hispanic enrollment, you'd naturally expect to see a drop in students whose primary home language isn't English.
Exactly. I mean, 86% of emergent bilingual students in Texas are also Hispanic. These aren't two separate stories. They're the exact same story.
Got it.
Emergent bilingual students dropped by 4.1% this past year. That's about 55,000 students.
Wait, 55,000?
Yeah. And to put that in context, they account for 71% of the total enrollment decline, despite only making up 24% of the overall student population.
So they are leaving at a vastly disproportionate rate.
Unbelievably disproportionate.
And it's not just language demographics either, it's economic ones too. This report points out that economically disadvantaged students, which is how the state identifies students from low-income households, dropped by 2.3%.
Right.
That is a loss of roughly 166,000 students over the last 2 years alone.
Which is incredibly significant from a policy and funding perspective.
How so?
Because those students carry additional formula weight in the state's school finance system.
Hold on, formula weight? Explain that in practical terms for us. Are you saying a district doesn't just lose standard funding when a low-income student leaves? Like, they actually lose a multiplied amount. It's a double financial hit.
Precisely. The state provides a baseline amount of funding per student, sure, but it adds extra weight, meaning extra dollars, for students who require more resources to educate, like emergent bilingual or economically disadvantaged kids.
Oh, wow.
So when an urban district loses those specific students, their revenue doesn't just dip, it plummets. They lose the base funding and the multiplier.
Man, which is just terrifying for a superintendent trying to keep the lights on. Oh, absolutely terrifying.
Let's talk about the age of these missing students, because this was the part of the report that really stopped me in my tracks. 60% of the total enrollment loss, that's over 46,000 students, happened in elementary school, specifically grades K through 5.
Yes, the decline is heavily concentrated at the bottom of the age bracket. Meanwhile, middle school enrollment has been falling consistently for 5 straight years.
It's like an airline trying to fly a massive 747 jet with only the first 3 rows booked.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I mean, the plane still costs the exact same amount of fuel to fly. The school district still has to cool the massive degangs and pay the staff. But the paying passengers at the elementary level are just gone.
That is a very accurate and honestly very alarming way to visualize it for school administrators. High school enrollment actually held up the longest. It only turned negative this past year.
Right.
But that K-5 shortage, that is now baked into the math. You cannot suddenly produce a cohort of 9th graders if they weren't in your 8th grade classrooms the year before. Right, because of the reverse pipeline effect.
Exactly.
If you have a massive drought at the source of a river, that dry patch is going to slowly travel downstream. Today's missing kindergartners are tomorrow's missing high school seniors.
Spot on. And this creates a predictable wave of budget shortfalls that will ripple through the system for the next 12 years.
Okay, so we have these huge demographic drops in Hispanic, emergent bilingual, and economically disadvantaged students, heavily concentrated in the youngest grades.
Right.
If they aren't in the traditional public ISDs, where are they going? Like, what is the alternative here?
What's fascinating here is the role of charter schools.
Okay.
If we synthesize these demographic points with the geography we discussed earlier, a very clear mechanism emerges. While traditional urban ISDs have been contracting, charter schools operate completely outside those traditional geographic boundaries.
Oh, right. They don't have the same zone.
Exactly. And their enrollment has grown every single year for a decade, without exception.
Wait, even during the pandemic?
Even during the pandemic. In the 2020-2021 school year, when traditional districts lost nearly 3% of their students, charters grew by over 8%.
That is wild.
Yeah. Over the last 10 years, they've jumped from holding about 5% of all Texas public school students to 8.2% today. That is over 446,000 students now in the charter system.
Okay, wait, I have a question about that. If charter schools are absorbing a lot of these kids, are they specifically capturing the bilingual and low-income students that the traditional districts are losing? Like, what do the demographics look like there?
That is the exact friction point of this entire report. Every single traditional ISD classification from major urban down to the smallest rural district lost emergent bilingual and economically disadvantaged students. Every single one.
Right.
But the charter sector was the only group that actually grew its share of these exact students.
Really?
Yeah. They saw a 2.5% increase in emergent bilinguals and a 2.0% increase in economically disadvantaged students.
Wow. So the charters are essentially actively capturing the exact demographic that the traditional public schools are losing?
Yes, they are.
They are providing an alternative that these specific families are actively choosing. But I'm looking at the numbers, and the charters only account for a fraction of the shift. They aren't absorbing all 76,000 missing kids.
No, they aren't.
Which leaves us with a massive hole in the data. If these kids aren't in traditional schools and they aren't all in charters, where's the rest of the leak?
Well, the state tracks this through what they call leaver reasons for older students, grades 7 through 12. And the top two reasons for leaving the Texas public school system are enrolling in a school outside of Texas or homeschooling.
And the report notes those two reasons combined account for over 55,000 exits per year, which vastly outnumbers the students who are returning to a home country or leaving for a Texas private school.
Right. What we're seeing is families making active, conscious decisions to exit the system entirely, whether it is driven by the cost of living, pushing them out of state, or, post-pandemic shifts in work-life balance, making homeschooling more viable. The result is the same. The public education system is fundamentally losing market share.
The birth-to-kindergarten ratio data really drove this home for me.
Oh, yeah. That data is fascinating.
For you listening, this metric basically tracks how many children born in Texas end up in a public kindergarten 5 years later. A decade ago, it's essentially a guarantee, right?
Yeah.
98.6% of kids born in Texas went to a public kindergarten.
Basically everyone.
Yeah, but by the 2025-26 school year, that ratio had dropped to 95.1%.
And, a 3.5% drop might not sound catastrophic to a casual observer, but at the scale of Texas, every single percentage point represents about 3,700 children.
Oh, wow.
That is thousands of families making a conscious decision to opt out of the public system from day one.
Yeah.
They aren't trying it and then leaving. They are never enrolling in the first place.
And that loss of market share extends well beyond kindergarten, doesn't it? Overall, public school enrollment share among all school-age Texans kids aged 5 to 17 has fallen from nearly 90% in 2015 to 86.5% today.
Which brings us to the future projections.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the natural instinct is to think, well, Texas is growing so fast, eventually the sheer volume of new people moving here will make up for that lost market share.
Right, you need a bigger pie.
Exactly, a bigger pie. But according to the Texas Demographic Center, that is mathematically impossible.
Yep.
They project that even though the state's total population will grow by a massive 46% by the year 2060, the under-18 population will only grow by 5%.
Yes. We are fundamentally becoming an older state.
Yeah.
Between 2020 and 2060, Texas is projected to add 13.5 million residents. But almost all of that growth is concentrated among adults.
Right.
The 65 and older population is going to more than double, while the school-age population stays relatively flat. So the idea that we can just grow our way out of this enrollment decline is a total myth.
So what do the actual enrollment projections look like for the next 5 years? Like, how bad does this get?
The Texas 2036 report modeled this out under low, mid, and high migration scenarios. Essentially, they guessed how many new people might move to the state over the next few years. And the results are incredibly sobering.
Let's hear them.
Under every single scenario, K-12 public school enrollment is projected to shrink next school year.
Wait, really? Even under the high migration scenario?
Yes, even under the high scenario. And in the low and mid-migration scenarios, the decline doesn't stop. It continues straight through the 2029-30 school year.
Oh, man.
Even under the most wildly optimistic high migration scenario where people are just flooding into the state at record levels, the projected enrollment in 2030 remains lower than what it is today.
So there is absolutely no realistic scenario where Texas simply reverts to the explosive K-12 growth of the 2010s.
Exactly. The demographic math simply does not support it. And this raises an important question because all of these grim projections, they are based purely on historical trends. They don't even factor in the new Texas Education Freedom accounts that take effect in the 2026-27 school year.
Let's pause on the Texas Education Freedom Accounts, or TIFA, for a second, just to be absolutely clear for you listening. What exactly is that program? And quick reminder, we're just looking at the math here, not endorsing any political stance on this.
Of course. It is essentially a school voucher program. It provides public state funds that families can use to pay for private schooling or homeschooling expenses.
Got it.
So it introduces a completely new, massive variable into the ecosystem. By subsidizing alternative education, it has the potential to drastically accelerate the exact loss of market share we've been discussing.
So the report is basically saying, here are our worst-case scenarios, and by the way, reality might be even worse because we couldn't even model the impact of these new vouchers yet.
That's the reality districts are facing right now. The floor could completely drop out of those projections.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's pull this all together.
Sounds good.
Even if you don't have kids in the Texas school system, you need to care about this. Because when a traditional ISD loses 17% of its students, they don't get to just turn off 17% of the lights.
Right. The building is still open.
Exactly. Your property taxes are suddenly funding half-empty buildings. If you're heading into a policy meeting or a school board meeting or just talking to your neighbors, here's the core truth you need to understand. Texas public schools are facing a structural decline, not a cyclical one.
That's the key takeaway.
Right. The drop is being driven by a severe drought in the K-5 pipeline, driven heavily by Hispanic and bilingual families leaving urban centers due to housing costs, and a consistent loss of market share to out-of-state moves, homeschooling, and charter schools.
It is a fundamental rewiring of the educational landscape. I mean, the engine that drove decades of continuous growth is sputtering, and the parts are being completely rearranged.
So what does this all mean? How should we be thinking about the future of this system?
It means a total paradigm shift.
Yeah.
For decades, the primary policy question in Texas education was how to manage explosive growth.
Sure, like how do we build schools fast enough?
Exactly. How do we hire enough teachers to handle the influx? That era is effectively over. The policy question now is no longer whether enrollment will decline. That is a demographic certainty.
Right.
The question is how the state adapts to a fundamentally smaller, differently distributed system.
Yeah.
How do you fund districts that are losing their economies of scale and their formula weights? How do you manage a system where rural areas and charters are growing, but the historic urban core is just hollowing out?
Yeah, it requires a completely different set of tools and a completely different mindset. Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. As you digest all these numbers, think about the physical footprint of public education in Texas.
It's massive.
It is. Next time you drive past one of those huge, sprawling high school campuses, or a multi-million-dollar football stadium sitting right in the middle of a major urban center like Dallas or Houston, ask yourself, as the student base continues to shift toward charters, toward rural areas, or out of the system entirely, who is going to be playing on that field in 10 years?
Yeah, that's a real question.
What becomes of that vast, incredibly expensive public infrastructure when it was constructed for a peak population that demographic math says is never, ever coming back? And more importantly, who is going to pay for its upkeep?
It's a profound question. The architecture of the past just doesn't fit the demographics of the future.
Exactly. The X-ray shows the break, but it's going to take a lot more than a cast to fix it. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.